Wife said her affair was just emotional until I found their private photos on her phone. I served divorce papers at her birthday party as a gift. I, 33M, have always favored small comforts, weekend barbecues with friends, relaxing movie nights in our living room, and occasional trips to the countryside. My wife seemed to share the same tastes. We met through a mutual friend at a backyard get-together, hit it off almost instantly, and got married a couple of years later in a modest ceremony. Nothing too grand, just our loved ones gathered in a small garden to witness us exchanging vows. For the better part of our marriage, I believed we were a normal couple dealing with the usual ups and downs of everyday life. She worked at a local boutique, and I spent my weekdays in a straightforward office job. We had no kids, only a laid-back routine that felt stable. But in recent months, her behavior changed in subtle ways I couldn't fully decipher at first. She started staying up late, scrolling through her phone with an intense focus I'd never seen before. If I came close or asked who she was texting, she'd tense up. When I gently asked about it, she'd brush me off, claiming she was simply browsing social media. One night, I noticed she was even more secretive. She clutched her phone like it contained state secrets. The next morning, I saw an unfamiliar number pop up on her screen as she walked by. I asked who it was, but she said it was just an old friend, nothing more. A few days later, she casually mentioned that she was helping a friend deal with some personal issues, stressing that it was a purely emotional bond. I found the wording strange, but I tried to be respectful. Everyone deserves a confidant. Yet something in my gut told me there was more to this story than she let on. It didn't take long before the sense of unease grew. Suddenly, she was dressing more elaborately just to run errands. She'd disappear for an hour at times, only to return home and claim she'd gone shopping or was just clearing her head. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. The tension rose when she'd get calls at odd hours. She'd step outside, whispering so I couldn't hear. Any question I asked was met with vague answers about how I was overreacting or turning a simple friendship into something it wasn't. I told a close friend about it, and he advised me to remain calm but keep my eyes open. I disliked the idea of snooping on my wife. If there was an issue, I wanted open conversation, not espionage. But the secrecy persisted. Eventually, I found myself conflicted, unsure if I was being a paranoid husband or if my wife was genuinely hiding a major betrayal. I didn't want to become the type who checks her phone behind her back, yet I could no longer shake the feeling that something big was happening right under my nose. I had no idea just how deep the deception ran, until the night I made the choice to look at her phone when she wasn't around. That decision changed everything. A few evenings later, I waited until she stepped into the shower. She'd left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. My heart pounded as I stared at that device. Despite my moral hang-ups, I felt compelled to know the truth. I unlocked it. She wasn't overly cautious about her passcode, and I'd seen her enter it dozens of times. What I discovered took my breath away. There were photos, intimate, explicit pictures of her with another man. The images were dated just days prior, meaning this was no long ago fling resurfacing. It was happening in real time. My hands shook as I scrolled through message threads. I found texts where she reassured him that what they shared was special, but not messy, and that I had no clue. One string even mentioned how it was just an emotional connection at first, but it evolved into something more. Reading that felt like stepping on shards of glass. It was undeniable evidence that she had gone beyond emotional and straight into physical betrayal. She walked out of the shower soon after, oblivious to what I had just seen. I confronted her on the spot, phone in hand. She gasped, tried to yank it away, but I refused to let go. She started spewing excuses. It never meant anything. It was just a mistake. When I pointed out the explicit images, her face paled. She changed tactics, blaming me for not giving her enough attention, saying she felt isolated and needed someone to confide in. I stood there, anger clashing with heartbreak, uncertain if I was hearing the truth or a desperate attempt to dodge responsibility. That night, I slept on the couch. Actually, I barely slept at all. My mind spun with questions about how long this had been going on and whether she'd have ever told me if I hadn't found the pictures. The next morning, she tried to apologize, insisting that I was reading too much into it. It was just one slip, she said, tears in her eyes. I can fix this. We can move on. But the trust one once had in her felt shattered. I called a friend who'd been through a messy divorce a year earlier. He told me to gather evidence and contact a lawyer if I was serious about separating. The notion of leaving my wife felt like a harsh step, but how could I stay after I'd seen such proof of her disloyalty? I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney for later that week, hoping to at least understand my options under our state's laws. My friend also warned me that sometimes cheating spouses promise to end things but keep lying. That thought made me grimace. I couldn't afford to be naive. Meanwhile, my wife kept insisting that she loved me and had made a harmless mistake. The phrase made my blood boil. How could something so intimate be labeled harmless? I gave her little response, preferring silence over pointless arguments. But inside, I simmered with a mix of rage and sorrow, clinging to the few certainties I had left. Chief among them was my resolve. I wouldn't let this betrayal go unaddressed. Her birthday was only a few weeks away. Initially, she planned to invite both sides of the family for a small celebration at our home, complete with decorations, a fancy cake, and the whole 9 yards. Under normal circumstances, I might have been excited to spoil her. But now each day felt like I was living under a dark cloud. My wife acted like she wanted to pretend everything was normal. She even tried to be extra affectionate, as though she could erase her actions with a few sweet gestures. Around that time, I met with a divorce attorney. I laid out the evidence, including screenshots of the messages and photos. The lawyer explained my legal standing, confirming there were more than sufficient grounds for divorce if I chose to proceed. Filing the paperwork wasn't complicated since we had no children and few shared assets. Still, it was emotionally draining. Signing my name on those documents felt like stepping onto a path of no return. One night, I found my wife meticulously selecting party favors for her upcoming birthday. She talked animatedly about how her friends and family would love the event. A twisted thought struck me. She was going to celebrate a new year of life while ignoring the wreckage she'd caused. My anger flared up. That's when the idea of serving her with divorce papers at her own birthday popped into my head. It sounded dramatic, even cruel, but a part of me craved that clarity to show her that her betrayal couldn't simply be swept under the rug. I wrestled with the morality of it, but the more I thought, the more it felt like the only way to cut through her denial. She'd orchestrated so many lies, and now she was orchestrating a party to keep up appearances. Why should I let her control the narrative? I told my lawyer I intended to serve her at the gathering. The lawyer cautioned me that it would undoubtedly be a public spectacle, but from a legal standpoint, there was no issue. In the end, it was my choice how to deliver the news. When my father visited, he noticed I was unusually tense. He asked if I was under a lot of stress at work. I hesitated, then admitted that my marriage was in crisis. I didn't go into graphic detail, just mentioned that she'd broken my trust in the worst way possible. My father, always a straightforward man, said, "If she can't respect you, you need to decide if you can live with that." His words echoed in my head for days. Maybe I couldn't live with it, and maybe I shouldn't try. As the date of the birthday party approached, I kept up the facade of a supportive husband. I nodded politely when she showed me decorations, wrote the guest list, and even offered to pick up her custom cake. In my mind, though, I was counting down the hours until I handed her an envelope that would change everything. The day of her birthday arrived. Family and friends filled our living room with cheerful chatter, unaware of the storm brewing behind my calm expression. I dressed neatly, wanting to avoid suspicion. My wife floated around, greeting relatives, accepting compliments on how lovely she looked, and pointing out the decor with pride. Ironically, she seemed happier than she had in weeks, as if she believed our recent tension had magically disappeared. Once everyone had gathered, it was time to bring out the birthday cake. People sang in unison, and she cut the first slice. She looked at me expectantly, probably waiting for a sweet toast. I cleared my throat. I could feel my heart hammering inside my chest. Before we enjoy the cake, I began, I want to say a few words about what this day represents. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. My wife gave me a cautious smile. She must have sensed something in my tone. I've learned a lot about honesty and loyalty lately, I continued, my voice steady despite the nerves. Sometimes people break your trust in ways you never see coming. But that doesn't mean you have to accept it. A ripple of confusion crossed a few guests' faces. My wife's cheeks flushed. She leaned forward as if to stop me, but I pressed on. In a marriage, when that trust is violated, there are consequences. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the sealed envelope containing the divorce papers. Her eyes widened. She looked around at our stunned family members and managed a faint laugh, probably hoping this was some odd joke. "What are you doing?" she whispered. I handed her the envelope. "Open it," I said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. She carefully tore it open, her hands trembling. The color drained from her face as she realized what it was. Immediately, several relatives gasped. A hushed tension spread across the room like a shockwave. My wife stared at the documents, struggling to find words. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "You can't humiliate me in front of everyone." Her voice cracked, shifting from disbelief to outrage. My father stood near the back, looking stunned but resolute. A couple of her relatives tried to intervene, asking if this was all a misunderstanding. But I stood firm. "You said what you had was just emotional," I said, stepping closer. "But I found those photos, and I'm done pretending." "The lies stop here," she protested, launching into a litany of excuses. Some guests looked away, clearly uncomfortable witnessing such a public confrontation. Others looked at me with sympathy, perhaps realizing I'd reached a breaking point. She glanced around wildly, as if searching for someone to defend her, but nobody spoke up. In a final burst of entitlement, she accused me of ruining her birthday on purpose. I met her gaze. "If you've been honest," I replied, "we could have handled this quietly. But you chose deceit. Now you can face the consequences." Her voice wavered. She tried to argue, but I turned and walked away, leaving her clutching the divorce papers in front of everyone. The aftermath was chaotic. Some family members demanded an explanation, while others hurried to console her. I stepped outside, feeling a swirl of relief and sorrow. I knew there'd be a long process ahead, filing official documents, dividing what little we owned, and dealing with the emotional fallout. But at least I stood up for myself, refusing to remain in a marriage defined by secret affairs and hollow apologies. That night, I drove off, deciding to stay at a friend's place for the time being. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some scolding me for the public drama, others offering support. I read a few, then turned the phone off. What mattered most was that I finally reclaimed my sense of self. By serving her those papers at her birthday party, I sent an unmistakable message. Betrayal has a cost, and I would no longer shoulder it alone. In the weeks that followed, my lawyer filed the necessary divorce papers, and I moved my belongings into a friend's spare room. Family members called, trying to mediate or suggest therapy, but I stayed firm. She attempted multiple apologies, insisted she could change, and pleaded that I reconsider. Yet, I kept thinking about those photos and the months of deceit. I realized that no amount of sweet talk could rebuild the trust she had shattered. We reached a swift, uncontested agreement since we had no children and only minor assets to divide. A few relatives took her side, calling me cruel for exposing her affairs so publicly. Others supported my decision, understanding the toll her betrayal had taken. In the end, I felt a sense of closure when the divorce was finalized. It wasn't the future I once imagined, but it was the clean break I needed. Life after the divorce brought a strange combination of relief and loneliness. I found a small apartment and poured myself into personal projects I'd long neglected. Days felt lighter, and nights were quieter, free of suspicion and resentment. Though the pain lingered, I discovered a renewed sense of self-respect, one rooted in knowing I refused to remain in a broken union. While her birthday party was the turning point, it was also the first step in moving forward on my own terms, ready to rebuild and eventually find a healthier, more honest relationship down the road.